Have you ever been kicked out of your own home by someone you brought into the world yourself? Have you ever heard the daughter you raised with so much sacrifice look you in the eyes and say, "Go back to where you belong"? I lived through that. And what I discovered afterward, no one there was ready to face it. Stay alert, because the pain I felt one day might knock on your door. Imagine coming home from the market, bags in hand, to find that they've changed your door lock. With no warning, no conversation, only silence and contempt. Today, I'm going to show you how one silent decision became my only weapon, and how, even with a shattered heart, I managed to turn the tables. If you've ever felt invisible within your own family, this is for you. Every second matters, because if you ignore what I'm about to share, you might end up begging for space in a place that is rightfully yours. Stay with me until the end, and find out what happened when my daughter thought she had won. You won't believe what I did the day they sent me away from my own story. My name is Mercedes Galvan, I'm 70 years old, and I've lived virtually all my life in Salta, in northern Argentina. I was a primary school teacher for almost 4 decades, the kind who decorated the classroom with colorful poster board, always put a flower on the desk, and knew every student's name years after graduation. After my husband passed away 12 years ago, my life boiled down to a single mission: help my daughter, Veronica, have a better life than mine. And for a while, I thought I was succeeding. When she graduated from law school, with a diploma we practically gave birth to together, I felt a pride that almost burst my chest. I had stretched myself thin to pay for books, internship clothes, and transportation. I collected money with school friends, sold costume jewelry, and gave extra lessons even though my back ached. Everything to see her wearing that black coat and smiling because she had reached her goal. And she did. She married Pablo, a man far too serious for my taste but hardworking, and they came to live with me right after their first child was born. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. While they got their finances in order, I gave up half the house, which had always been mine, so they'd have a safe corner. I moved to the back, a simple little room I'd adapted myself with a sink, an old hot plate, and a widow's bed. I did it with an open heart. After all, those who love want to see the other fly. And if for that I had to shrink a bit, so be it. But months turned into years, and I went from being the homeowner to becoming an invisible employee. My routine became serving. I'd wake at 6, make coffee, help with the grandchildren, get lunch started, and when they returned from work, I disappeared, literally hiding in my little room. Veronica began to avoid me. She was no longer my easy smiling girl. Everything about her was now haste, coldness, and short orders. "Mom, don't go in there. Mom, I already told the kids." Pablo, for his part, never bothered to hide his annoyance. He looked at me as if tolerating a constant noise, and I, foolishly, pretended not to notice. Until one day, about 2 weeks before everything collapsed, I entered the kitchen while they were out and saw an open envelope on the table. It was a draft contract. At the top was my house's name, and below, Veronica's name as the future owner. I nearly dropped the kettle. I stood there, trying to understand if it was real. "What do you mean?" She was trying to transfer the property into her name. Without telling me, my heart raced. My head felt hot, but I returned to my little room and cried in silence as I always had. Only this time, something in me had changed. The next day, I went to the city registry office. I took a crowded bus, my knee aching and my stomach in knots, but I went. There, I requested a second copy of the house deed just to be sure. That's when the clerk, very helpful, mentioned there was a pending transaction, a transfer attempt not yet completed, awaiting my signature. I swallowed hard. I left with shaky legs and went straight to Dr. Luis Cardozo's office, my daughter's boss. He was a polite gentleman, always cordial with me at office parties. I explained everything, my voice trembling, and there, in his office, I made the hardest decision of my life. I signed the sale of the house that very day. To him, a clean, transparent contract with clauses that legally protected me and allowed me to continue living there for the rest of my life. if I so wished. But, above all, it prevented any future attempts at manipulation. Luis was surprised, of course. He said he regretted what I was going through and that he'd keep everything confidential until I felt ready. I placed the key for the next chapter of my life in a little silver box that had belonged to my mother, and I returned home with a different kind of silence in my chest, a silence that knew exactly what it was doing. The rest of the week passed like a silent film. I watched Veronica and Pablo through new eyes, the way they whispered when I entered, the doors that closed, the notes that vanished. And still, I kept making lunch, cleaning the floor, picking the boys up from school. Until that Friday, when I woke early to go to the market. It was a rainy, gray day, one of those that makes your soul want to stay under the covers. Yet I went. I returned with wet bags, boots caked in mud, and a door that no longer opened. I stood there turning the key that wouldn't fit, trying to understand what was happening. I rang the bell once, twice, 3 times. When Veronica opened the door, there was no anger on her face, only a dry fatigue, as if she had already decided everything. She crossed her arms and said without blinking, "This is no longer your home. Go back to your town, Mom." She didn't shout. She didn't explain. She just decreed. And I simply smiled. A small, almost invisible smile. My eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. I turned around, still holding the bags, and left. But not back to my village. I had another destination. I walked down the sidewalk as the rain washed my face, as if the sky knew what was happening. I had neither an umbrella nor an alternative in mind. But deep down, I knew that moment would come. That's why I anticipated it. I went straight to the modest hotel by the bus terminal, where I'd left a change of clothes with Doña Teresa and old acquaintance. She didn't ask questions. She simply offered me a cup of hot tea and a fine wool blanket, the kind that itches the skin but warms the heart. I spent the morning there, sitting quietly, watching the fogged-up window. The world outside seemed distant, and inside me, everything was a mixture of grief and relief. Grief for realizing that my daughter saw me as a burden. Relief for knowing that, this time, I had acted before it was too late. I remembered the moment I signed that contract with Dr. Cardozo. My hands had trembled, but my gaze was steady. And now, that signature was my shield. Shortly after noon, my phone buzzed. It was him. "Mercedes, we need to talk. Are you in Salta?" I replied simply, "Yes, I'm nearby." He suggested a discreet cafe between downtown and his neighborhood. I arrived early, sat in a hidden corner, ordered black coffee, and waited. When he came in, he carried a large envelope and wore a serious expression. "She doesn't know what's coming," he said, without needing any explanation. He had called Veronica to a 3:00 p.m. meeting at his office, without telling her why. He'd just asked that she come ready to discuss a matter of personal interest. The plan wasn't to get revenge. I didn't want to see her suffer, but I needed to show that I wasn't invisible, that I still had a name. And that name had been on the deed until a few days earlier for a good reason, because I built everything alone, with the sweat of my entire life. I returned to the hotel with my heart pounding. The rain had paused, but the city remained gray. I tried to nap, but my body wouldn't let me. I replayed every detail of my life with Veronica as if it were an old movie, with blurred images and scenes that hurt more now than they did back then. I remembered the birthdays I organized for her as a child, the sleepless nights caring for her fever, the notes she left on the mirror as a teenager saying, "I love you, Mom." Where did it all go wrong? At 3:15, my phone rang again. It was Dr. Cardozo. "She's here. We've finished the meeting. Can you come now?" We arranged to meet at his office when he'd be alone. I took a taxi with shaky legs. I didn't know what to expect. Crying? Furious? Indifferent? In my mind, all scenarios were possible, except what actually happened. When I arrived, he greeted me at the door and led me to his office. The envelope lay empty on the desk, the documents spread out. "She tried to argue," he said, but when I showed her the deed and explained it was a legal, final decision, she went silent, didn't cry, didn't shout, just left. I stood still, feeling a pang in my chest. This wasn't what I wanted, but it was necessary. For the first time in years, someone spoke for me, and my story was not ignored. I remained silent for long seconds. Then I drew a deep breath. All I ever wanted was to be respected. That's it. He nodded, eyes saying more than words. That afternoon, I understood that justice isn't vengeance. It's setting boundaries, and that even the quietest mothers have the right to say, enough. I left his office with slow steps. I felt neither anger nor sadness, just a strange emptiness, as if the pain had left me but left an echo inside. I hailed the same taxi back to the hotel and asked to be dropped off at the Central Plaza. I needed fresh air, the hustle of life. I sat on a wooden bench by the fountain, watching a child chase pigeons and a woman selling roasted peanuts from a cart. Life went on, even when you feel yours has been turned upside down. That moment, I found myself wondering if my daughter cried afterward, if, when she was alone, she remembered who I was, felt guilt, shame, or simply relief at having rid herself of me. It was a fleeting thought, because another followed. What if I had acted differently? Screamed earlier? Stood my ground? Refused that little back room? But I am not that woman. I never was. I love in silence, and I learned to survive quietly. I returned to the hotel at Talai. Dusk. The orange light of the sky poured through the thin windows, bathing the room in a warmth that wasn't physical, but almost spiritual. I took off my shoes, put the kettle on the stove, and wrote one phrase in an old notebook. I exist. I whispered it like rehearsing a new language. For the first time in a long while, I didn't cry. I realized that pain was no longer the center of my life. I was still hurt, but whole. That night, I slept early. My body gave in to exhaustion, and my mind did not resist. But before closing my eyes, I pictured my life going forward. I still had my pension, my health, the desire to care for a plant, read a mystery novel, stroll the Sunday market unhurried. Was that little? No, it was plenty. It was mine. For the first time, I could live for myself, even if solitude sometimes hurt more than I cared to admit. The next morning, I rose with the sun. I didn't pack up. It wasn't time yet. I stopped by a small cafe, one that smelled of grilled bread and good memories. I bought 2 stuffed rolls and took one to Doña Teresa as thanks. She welcomed me without questions, and that was worth more than gold. We sat in her kitchen, drank mate, and chatted about soap operas, neighbors, and trivial things. Simple things that, by their very simplicity, heal. Mid-conversation, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a number I recognized blindfolded. Veronica, I need to talk. Tell me where you are. I stared at the screen as if at a door, unsure whether to, enter. My heart raced, but this time not from fear, but caution. I didn't know what she wanted. To apologize? Explain? Regain control? I took a deep breath and wrote, "Not now, Veronica. I need time." There was no reply, and I didn't wait. That message was like a delayed echo of everything she hadn't dared say before, but I was already somewhere else. Emotionally, spiritually, almost physically. The cycle had closed, and it was no longer her who determined my time. It was me, for the first time. Without shouts, without vengeance, without an audience, just me, with myself. And the silence, which now was shelter, not punishment. I ended that day wandering aimlessly through the city, as if rediscovering a forgotten version of myself. I passed the school where I'd taught for years. The building looked old, but the garden still bloomed with daisies. I wanted to go inside, see the bulletin board filled with children's drawings, but I held back. It wasn't time. There was much to rebuild within. Me first. And for the first time, I had the time. On Monday, I went to the real estate agency with the contract in hand. I wanted to understand my rights, see my options. A young woman named Mariela helped me patiently and with attentive eyes. When she learned I was the former owner of the house now in Dr. Cardozo's name, her eyes widened. "Oh, the lawyer's house. That caused quite a stir around here," she said with a light laugh. I didn't reply, only smiled discreetly. By then, I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. She showed me some small apartments near downtown, within what I could afford with the sale proceeds and my pension. Nothing luxurious, but with a balcony, morning sun, and nobody ordering me back to anywhere. One caught my eye, a third-floor flat in an old but well-kept building, with large windows overlooking a plaza with trees and red benches. I noted the address, thanked Mariella, and left feeling lighter. On the way back, I stopped at a newsstand and bought a new, little notebook. A simple blue cover and slightly rough pages, just the way I like. I began writing little pieces of how I felt, not as an outpouring, but as a record. I wrote about that day's rain, Veronica's words, Dr. Cardozo's silence, the bread and mate at Doña Teresa's. I wrote so I could remember, because sometimes we erase too much of what hurts and forget that remembering is important so we don't lose ourselves again. That afternoon, I got another message, this time from my son-in-law, Pablo. Are you happy now? You destroyed the family. I deleted it without replying. For the first time, I felt I owed no one. No explanations, justifications, or pity. The family didn't break up because of that contract. It had been falling apart for a long time, piece by piece, until there was no room left for me. I just left before they erased me completely. At the end of that day, I returned to the school where I had taught, but this time I went inside. A new staff member who didn't know me let me take a look around. The teacher's lounge still smelled of chalk and weak coffee. I saw a little girl sitting in the last row of classroom 3, nose pressed to her notebook. I saw myself in her, so many years ago, and it was as if my story found its mirror. I felt proud, not of where I was, but of where I had come from. I left with certainty that I was not a disposable woman. I was history, and history isn't thrown away. It can be ignored, distorted, even hidden for a time, but it always finds a way back to the surface. That day, between the chalk smell and distant sound of recess, my dignity began to breathe again. In the following days, I continued apartment hunting, 3 or 4 visits. Each had something special. One, a basil plant on the balcony. Another, old tiles reminiscent of my mother's kitchen. Then I found that third-floor place overlooking the plaza. I entered, looked at the bright living room, and knew this was it. Not because it was the best, but because it was the first place where no one would look at me as an annoyance. I signed the lease 2 days later. For the first time in a long time, I put my name on a mailbox belonging to a home that was mine alone. I wrote Mercedes Galvan with a trembling blue pen and stared at it for minutes. Because some names we almost forget and need to write again to remember who we are. Moving day arrived with few belongings. My clothes, some kitchenware, my poetry books, a framed photo of my husband young and shy in a white suit. I also packed a towel embroidered by my mother and a navy blue blanket I had used for years on my old sofa. Everything fit into 4 boxes and 2 suitcases. It wasn't much, but it was everything that mattered. The remnants of time, pain, and memory. I hired a small moving truck, and the driver was kind, calling me Mrs. Mercedes, with respect, not pity. When we reached the building, he carried each box upstairs with me and marveled at the view of the plaza. "You're lucky," he said. "Sun all day." I smiled. That's exactly what I wanted. And it was. A place the sun could enter uninvited. A place where no one slammed a door in my face. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, arranging, and choosing where each thing would go. It felt like drawing a new map of my life. The coffee maker by the window, the books on an improvised shelf of produce crates, the blue blanket folded over a brown armchair I'd bought at a thrift shop, and the photo of my husband, right there on the side. Table looking at me as if to say, "You did it." That first night I cooked for myself with pleasure. Fluffy rice, a soft yolked egg, and a piece of roasted pumpkin just how I like. I ate on the balcony, watching the sky darken over the plaza, and thought, how do we forget ourselves like that? How does a mother become a shadow in her own home and not notice for so long? But I didn't blame myself, nor did I feel ashamed. Even silence has its time. I resumed Sunday market visits, now unhurried. wandering between stalls like someone rediscovering a forgotten city. I bought floral dish towels, a purple heart plant, and a cornbread cake made by a woman who reminded me of my grandmother. People smiled at me as if I were anyone. And at that moment, that was exactly what I needed. To be just anyone. Invisible by choice. Free by decision. One day I ran into a former student at the vegetable stand. She recognized me instantly and shouted, "Señor Mercedes." She ran over and hugged me tightly. She was now a mother of 2 and working as a nurse. She said she always remembered the stories I told before recess and the times I stayed by her side when her father was ill. "You saved me, you know?" she said. And I could only smile with tears in my eyes. That phrase echoed within me. You saved me. I thought, how many times do we save others without saving ourselves first? How many times do we pour all our love into a leaky boat, believing that love alone will keep everything afloat? Maybe loving also means knowing when to leave, when to stop, when to return to yourself. After that encounter, I came home with new eyes. I tended my plants with more care, looked at myself in the mirror without hurry, and slept with the windows open. My body, once bent under invisible weight, now walked more upright. And my heart no longer beat only with longing. I hadn't spoken to Veronica since that message. And to be honest, there were days when that absence hurt. I am a mother. That doesn't change. The pain of a child's withdrawal isn't resolved as if closing an account. It comes and goes. But I learned not to feed that absence as before. When it came, I let it. And when it left, I let it go. Some longings don't demand a reply, only respect. I wrote her a letter once, tucked away in the dresser drawer, folded in 4. In it, I didn't demand anything. I just described my mornings, the sunlight on my balcony, how life could be light again. But I never sent it, because I understood that letter was more for me than for her. It was my way of moving forward without carrying rage. Forgiveness, I discovered, isn't the end of pain. It's the start of freedom. One afternoon, while watering my plants, I saw a little bird building a nest on my window ledge. It was restless, chattering more than its tiny body should allow. I watched for days until it returned at the same time each day. I began leaving crumbs by the pot, and it stared back as if to say thank you. A small symbol, perhaps, but to me it felt like life telling me, you still have something to nurture. In time, I befriended a few neighbors. The woman in 304 brought me a custard pudding on my birthday without even knowing me well. The man in 301 helped me replace the water heater coil. None of them knew what I'd been through, and that was liberating, because I wasn't the lady kicked out of her home. I was just Mercedes, a neighbor with a teacher's hands and a listening heart. One day I ran into Doña Teresa at the market. She invited me to lunch the next Saturday. We made empanadas together, laughing at old stories. And afterward, she said, "You look like a different person, Mercedes. There's a sparkle in your eye again." That struck me. Sometimes we change so much inside that we don't notice how it shows on the outside. And she was right. I was more alive. Not whole, but more myself. During that time, I got an offer to work part-time at a community library, recommended by the same former student I'd met at the market. I accepted. Every morning for 2 hours, I helped organize books, guided readers, and read stories aloud to children. My salary was modest, but what I gained was priceless. It gave me purpose. I remember a 6-year-old boy asking, "Are you the lady of the books?" I laughed and said, "No, but they like me." He replied, "That's because you sound like a book." That dismantled me inside. Those words were like a seal on the envelope life had been writing for me. I was still needed. Maybe not by Veronica, but by the world, in some small, unseen way. I began writing more often in my blue notebook. Not memories, but plans. Places I wanted to visit, films to rewatch, people to find. For the first time in a long while, my days weren't about survival, but about planting seeds. Sometimes I wondered if Veronica knew where I was. If she walked by the plaza and looked up at my building. if she told the children where their grandmother had gone, not because I wanted to return, but out of human curiosity. She never tried again, never called, never showed up. And over time, I stopped waiting. That didn't mean I stopped loving, just that I accepted love can be one way and moving on is a choice, not an obligation. Pablo, on the other hand, stopped sending messages. Perhaps his boss's silence said more than my replies ever could. Or maybe he realized you don't trample someone who never offers resistance. I don't know, and I don't care anymore. Some people we must let go, even when instinct screams to hold on. Holding someone who doesn't want to stay is the quickest way to sink together. At the library, I started giving small reading workshops for older adults, widows, retirees, people feeling forgotten. And there, amidst timid voices and dog-eared pages, I realized my story wasn't an exception. There were so many other Mercedes with different names and similar silences. A woman named Ophelia told me, "My son asked me not to speak at his house because he was ashamed of my accent." And there, silently, we cried together, because some pains ask not for explanations, only for someone to listen. My home now was more than a space. It was a reflection. Every corner held a piece of me. The embroidered cloth in the kitchen, the wall of childhood photos, the chipped cup I used on my first day there. A home isn't built overnight. It forms from the fragments we gather after falling. And I was learning to piece myself back together, even with cracks. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to visit the cemetery where my husband lies. I took simple flowers bought for 5 pesos at the corner stand. I sat on a bench and told him everything, aloud. I spoke of Veronica, the house, the rain, the move, the library, the plaza, the bird. I cried, smiled, fell silent, and then whispered, "I did what I could, and now I'm coming back to myself." It was the first time I felt at peace there, in the place where pain once dwelled. After that visit, I returned, changed, more determined not to live waiting for anyone. With that new energy, I began planning a short trip, just me, a book, and a notebook. I chose Cafayate, a beautiful nearby town among vineyards and cobblestone streets. I booked a simple inn with breakfast and guaranteed quiet. For the first time, I didn't want to run away, just be with myself. Arriving there, I was moved by the scenery. The blend of mountains, open sky, and grape scent reminded me the world was larger than any pain I'd known. I walked the trails slowly, entered a craft shop, and bought a leather bracelet engraved with Fuerza. I wore it on my left wrist like a mark of rebirth. That final night, I sat on the inn's porch with a glass of wine and my blue notebook. I wrote, "Being a mother didn't save me. Being a daughter didn't either. What saved me was remembering that before any role, I was a person." And as I wrote, I understood my story wasn't about loss. It was about return, not to a place, but to myself. When I came back from Cafayate, something inside me had shifted subtly but forever. It was as if I had finally learned my own rhythm. I stopped blaming myself for not being firmer in the past. I stopped imagining different scenarios. Instead, I began asking, what can I build from here? That question became my compass. At the library, I started a reading project with children from the local public school. Volunteer, of course. The principal was moved by my proposal. She remembered me from my teaching days and said, "The kids will love having a real teacher around." That touched me. Sometimes we think we're forgotten and discover we've left seeds where we never imagined. The children called me Profe Merce and sat on the floor, eyes shining, while I read aloud. It was like going back in time, but without pain. A boy named Tomas gave me a drawing with my name and a huge heart. A girl, Celeste, asked if I was a witch because you make stories feel real. I laughed out loud. These little things healed me. Unknowingly, those children were rebuilding the pieces of the woman I used to be. One evening, as I returned from the library, I got an unexpected call. Dr. Cardozo. His voice was calm, but more personal than usual. He thanked me again for trusting him with the sale, then said, "I spoke with your daughter a few days ago. She seems to be starting to understand." My body froze for a second. I didn't ask for details, just thanked him and hung up. I didn't need to know everything. If she was beginning to understand, fine. If not, that was her concern now. That night, I thought about his words. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt, as if watching a plant sprout after months of nothing. I didn't rush to water or prune, just left it be and went on with my evening. I made a cheese and oregano pancake, watched a silly movie on broadcast TV, and slept with the windows open, feeling the spring breeze arrive. Spring brought an energy I thought I never would feel again. I started going out more, visiting new bookstores, attending city-sponsored reading gatherings. I met other women my age, some with stories as hard or harder than mine. One, Regina, had been placed in a nursing home by her children. She escaped and restarted selling cheese bread at home. We became friends. With Regina, I laughed out loud again. She swore like she recited poetry and wore scandalous red lipstick with enviable dignity. She taught me that life after 70 isn't a penalty, it's an act of rebellion. Mercedes, life doesn't end. It transforms, she told me, and I believed it because I saw it happening inside myself. A silent but constant rebirth. One day, sitting on the plaza bench, she asked if I missed Veronica. I paused for a few seconds and replied, I miss the idea I had of her, but the real person, I've learned to live without. She nodded and said, that's maturity, not sadness. In that moment, I realized growing up isn't the youth's privilege. Grow when we stop expecting others to recognize us and start recognizing ourselves. Living with Regina opened internal doors I didn't even know were locked. One day, she convinced me to attend a literary open mic at a cultural center. I hesitated, said I had no suitable clothes, didn't know anyone, wasn't one for that anymore. She laughed. Put on that embroidered blouse you have tucked away and come. You have stories worth hearing. And I went. For the first time in years, I dressed to live, not to please. The open mic took place on a Thursday night. Low lights, coffee aroma, people of all ages. A young man recited poems like confessions. An elderly lady with a cane read erotic tales with a gleam in her eye. I watched, mesmerized. At the end, the mic opened to the audience. Regina nudged me. It's your turn. My heart raced, but I stood. I climbed onto the small stage, legs shaking, and read a passage from my blue notebook, the part about the Cafayate Inn balcony and what I wrote that night. Before any role, I was a person. When I finished, silence held the room for a few seconds, then applause, timid but genuine, as if they were welcoming rather than clapping. My eyes filled with tears. It wasn't about vanity. It was about being seen. After that night, I attended every week. I wrote new pieces, discovering my own voice and pace. My life, a teacher, a mother, a widow, was being rewritten. Between the lines emerged humor, desire, doubt, and strength. A Mercedes who no longer needed to fit into a tight role. One Saturday, as I strolled through the plaza, I spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Veronica, with the two boys. They were running after a kite. She sat on the opposite bench, scrolling her phone. She didn't see me, or pretended not to. I paused, watching from afar. My heart didn't pound. I didn't feel the urge to approach. I just observed and realized that, for the first time, I was not a fixed point waiting to be noticed. I was motion. She eventually got up, called the boys, and left. No exchanged glances, no drama. But at that moment, inside me solidified a truth. I no longer needed that validation. I wasn't the mother begging for space. I was the woman who built her own ground. And that, just that, was a miracle. I got home that afternoon calm. I opened my windows, watered my plants, and played an old song. Then I sat on the balcony and wrote in my notebook. Today, I saw my daughter and didn't cry. I saw my grandsons and didn't feel absence. Maybe that's what they call healing, a pain that doesn't hurt the same anymore. As the sun set, I painted my nails dark red, a color I never wore. Regina would be proud, and so was I. Weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. handwritten on a plain brown envelope with no return address. I recognized the handwriting. Veronica. I opened it carefully. Just a few lines. No formal apology, no elaborate justification. Just, "Mom, I hope you're well. I understand now, too late. The boys ask about you. If you ever want to see them, we're here." I folded it gently, placed it in my blue notebook, and didn't cry or smile. Only took a deep breath and let it rest. It wasn't forgiveness, but a nod. And I knew I didn't have to decide anything that moment. Life taught me not to react impulsively. Some answers emerge in silence, like a plant that grows only when the soil is ready. And my soil was still resting. The following week, I showed the letter to Regina. As always, she was direct. "And what do you want to do with it?" I had no immediate answer. Part of me wanted to rush to the grandchildren and hug them as if nothing had happened. Another part, the more wounded, wanted time. I had the right to want that. Regina didn't push. She said, "You don't forgive so they return. You forgive so you can stay." That phrase stayed with me, an irritating pebble in my shoe but revealing. Perhaps forgiveness is more about finding peace in your place than returning to the old one. And maybe I had already forgiven without knowing. I continued my routine. Library, open mic, cafes with Regina, Sunday markets. Inside me, the pain of expulsion grew more distant. Not erased, but transformed. Like a scar that no longer burns to the touch, only remains to remind you that once you were wounded, and you survived. One day, while organizing old papers, I found a photo of little Veronica, about 7 years old, in her school uniform, smiling without her front teeth. I remembered that morning, the snack I prepared, the bow I carefully tied in her hair. I held the photo, breathed deeply, and whispered, "I still love you, but now, I love myself too." It was one of the most honest moments of my life. I stored the photo in a wooden box with other memories, not out of bitterness, but respect for my process. Sometimes love also means keeping distance, knowing you can't return to the same place and expect everything to be different, if only you have changed. The next spring, I was invited by the city to participate in a public reading circle in the Central Plaza. I was surprised. A large event with schools, libraries, and community groups. They wanted me to open the event by reading a passage from my blue notebook. I thought for 2 days before accepting, not from fear, but out of respect for what that meant to me. Taking the stage before so many people to tell my story was more than symbolic. It was sealing a cycle. On the morning of the event, I wore the embroidered blouse Regina liked and pinned my hair in a simple bun. I brought my notebook, a handkerchief, and a calm smile. The plaza was crowded. Children, teenagers, seniors, all waiting for stories. When they called my name, my stomach tightened. Yet I walked to the microphone with steady steps, carrying my life in my hands. It deserved to be heard. I read the part describing the day I found the door locked, the drenched bags, the pouring rain, my daughter's voice saying, "Go back to your town." Then I read what came next. The house sale, the silence, the new beginning. When I finished, the plaza was so still I could hear my heart. Then applause, some timid, some emotional. I saw tears in strangers' eyes and felt something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. After descending the stage, a woman hugged me and said, "Thank you for putting into words what many of us live and keep silent." That struck me. It was exactly that. My story wasn't only mine. It belonged to so many who had been pushed to the back of homes, to the back of history, to the back of memory. But now we surfaced, one by one, in loud voices. Late afternoon, I returned home light. I opened every window, made tea, and sat on the balcony with my notebook on my lap. I wrote, "Today, my story was heard, and that is enough." Then I closed my eyes and let the evening breeze pass through me. It was as if the world said, "You were invisible for a time, but you never ceased to exist." That night, Regina showed up with an improvised cake to celebrate my debut as a writer, as she said. We laughed, toasted with grape juice, and danced in the middle of the living room like two teenagers. It was ridiculous and liberating all at once. Happiness sometimes looks like these small things: a crooked cake, a clumsy dance, a laugh without reason. In the days that followed, I kept receiving messages from people who were at the plaza. Some wanted to share their stories, others simply thanked me. I realized my pain had become a bridge, and that was one of the most beautiful discoveries of my life, that even suffering, when faced with dignity, can shelter someone else. And it was in this context, in the midst of this new, meaningful phase, that I decided to reply to Veronica's letter, not urgently, not with expectation, but with truth. I sat at the table, breathed deep, and wrote in firm handwriting, "I'm well. I hope you are too. I'm not sure I'm ready to meet you all yet, but know I hold no resentment. I'm moving on in my own time." I folded the letter, mailed it, and let the rest in the hands of time. Her reply came weeks later, longer this time, with more words. She said she understood my decision, was in therapy, and hoped, when I felt comfortable, to introduce me to the boys again. She didn't directly ask forgiveness, but there was a humility I hadn't known in her. I sat silent for days, neither telling Regina nor writing in my notebook, just digesting it calmly, because sometimes emotional digestion is slower than physical. I thought a lot about my grandsons, their early years, one calling me Abu with a drawn-out O like singing. Wondered if they remembered me, if they ever asked why Grandma disappeared, or if they heard another story. More than anything, I asked myself, did I want to reconnect? Or did I need that space to remain mine? I talked it through with Regina. She listened as always. When I finished, she said, "You can take a step without reopening the door. You don't have to return. Just peek through." That image stayed, teaching me I don't need to resume the old dynamic. I don't need to forget what happened, but perhaps I could look through the gap, see what's changed, and consciously choose whether to cross again. With that idea, I proposed a neutral meeting. Coffee in a public cafe, just me and Veronica. No grandchildren yet, no expectations, just two grown women seeing if something could be rebuilt. She agreed. We set a Tuesday morning slot at a cafe near the Central Plaza. I went with no makeup, no expectations, and raw courage. When I saw her approach, my heart tightened, but she looked thinner, with streaks of gray in her hair and a weary face. She didn't resemble the woman who had expelled me. She seemed someone trying to gather her own pieces. We greeted with a brief cheek kiss, sat down, ordered coffee, and sat in silence for a few seconds until she said, "Thanks for coming." I just nodded. Conversation needed more than words. She spoke of therapy, of her marriage not being the same, of struggles with the boys, of the regret that began the day after that locked door. I listened, without interrupting, without judging, because sometimes people just need to be heard. When it was my turn, I shared my experience. The hotel, the letter, the house sale, the new home, the library, the open mic, Regina's support. Most of all, I spoke of me, the Mercedes reborn after abandonment. She cried. I did not out of coldness, but because I had cried all I needed to. The pain was now memory. Memory was strength. We parted with a hug, brief but sincere. We didn't plan next steps or make promises. We merely exchanged a look saying, "We're trying." And that, in that moment, was enough. After that coffee, we exchanged occasional brief messages, simple updates. The boys have a cold. I went to a job interview. Sending love. Short phrases, but lighter and more present. I replied in kind, because I learned affection can be subtle, like a gentle breeze that opens a window long closed. Months later, Veronica invited me to our younger grandson's birthday, a small family gathering. I hesitated for days, asking myself, am I going because of longing or to be accepted? The answer was clear. I no longer needed acceptance. I just wanted to see my grandchildren. That was enough. I attended wearing the same blue dress from my teaching graduation, kept for decades. I brought a carrot cake with chocolate frosting, like I used to make for little Veronica's birthdays. When I arrived, the youngest grandson ran to me shouting, "Abu!" He hugged me fiercely, no hesitation. That moment broke me, because I ceased to be the woman expelled and became the grandmother returned. Veronica received me with a tense but genuine smile. There were no crowds, just a few children, Pablo, quieter than I remembered, and close relatives. Everything went naturally. No one mentioned the past or pretended it didn't exist, which to me was a sign of maturity. Pain doesn't need constant revisiting. It only demands respect. After the party, Veronica invited me inside. She showed me new photos of the boys, offered coffee, and asked if I'd visit again. I said yes, with one condition: never to be invisible there again. She agreed and looked me in the eye. I don't want to repeat mistakes. I'm learning. For the first time, I believed her. I returned home light, as if something was quietly restored. Not my dignity, that I regained alone, but perhaps a space, a connection, a thread. Though worn, it still held new moments. I realized reconciliation isn't always explosive. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper. Regina asked if I wasn't afraid of being hurt again. I admitted that I was, but that now I knew what to do if it happened, that I had ground beneath my feet and a voice. And no wound lasts when you learn to place yourself at the center of your life. She smiled, and we toasted with cheap wine like two road sister. Because that's what we were, women beaten by life and yet choosing to keep. Dancing, even with wounded feet. Over time, my bond with my grandsons grew. Afternoons together, story time, cartoon marathons, questions about why I knew so much about plants. They carried no burden from what happened. And perhaps that was the greatest gift. Children live in the now, and in that now, I was just grandma with lavender-scented clothes and freshly baked cornbread. Months later, Veronica invited me to a Sunday lunch. I accepted. Seated at the table with her, Pablo, and the boys, I realized, and breathed deeply, that the woman across from me was no longer the daughter who hurt me. She was someone evolving, as was I. We weren't the same. And yet there we were, sharing bread as if starting over without erasing what had been. Sometimes Pablo still eyed me with hidden discomfort, as if unsure where to place me. But I no longer shrank. I smiled, served myself, joined the conversation, because I knew my worth no longer depended on his gaze, or anyone else's. I existed, and that was enough. I continued my work at the library, open mics and outings with Regina. My life ran alongside this reconciliation, and that was vital. I no longer wished to orbit my daughter's life. I was a planet of my own, with light and darkness, climate and seasons. Those who wished to visit had to respect that. One afternoon, Veronica called just to say, "I admire you, Mom." I never said it, but I always felt it. I held the phone to my chest for a moment, then replied, "Thank you. I needed to hear that," and went on with my day, treasuring her words like an old, precious metal. Old pains still visit sometimes, in the hush of midnight, a passing scent, a familiar dish. But now I welcome them like old acquaintances, saying, "I know you, I remember, but I also moved on," and they depart without lingering. I wrote a reflection about that for an open mic, on moving forward despite wounds, silent dignity, the strength that grows when you stop begging for crumbs. Afterwards, a young woman told, "Me? You helped me see my mother isn't weak? She's just tired." I hugged her as if I were hugging my younger self. In that embrace, I felt my story was no longer only mine. It was a mirror, an outstretched hand, a beacon for others lost in the dark. Today, I look back with both pain and pride. No one should be expelled from their own home by someone they loved so deeply. But few lessons taught me as much as that day. The humiliation I suffered cut deep, but it was the crack through which light entered. I wouldn't have found myself otherwise. The house I lost was never truly mine when I had to beg for affection there, and the home I built afterward is made of choices, calm, and freedom. It may be small, but it holds what matters: my dignity, my plants, my books, my story, And now, also, a Mercedes who learned to love herself before seeking to be loved. Reconnecting with Veronica didn't erase what she did, but it showed me relationships can be rewritten when you set clear boundaries. It's not about forgetting, it's about choosing not to carry the weight. She knows she can't expect blind devotion from me again, and I know, if she wants to remain in my life, she must come with honesty, because I am no longer invisible. Regina calls us emotional survivors. I like that expression, because in my case, surviving wasn't enduring in silence. It was learning to speak, speaking through gestures, through absence, through my quiet reconstruction. I discovered that sometimes the most powerful response is not to return, and sometimes it's to return on your own terms. My grandsons now know who I am. They know where I live, what I cook, and that their grandmother is strong. More than that, they know that no one should be treated like disposable objects, even by family. Without knowing it, I've taught them what I was never taught, that love also needs respect to survive. My blue notebook is almost full. Only a few pages remain. When it ends, I might begin another, or maybe not. For now, my story writes itself in the steps I take without fear, the mornings I wake without pain, the nights I sleep without longing. If you've read this far, let me tell you, never accept living in the backseat of your own life. You deserve the center. And if no one makes room, then leave. Build your own space. It's not always easy, but it's always, always worth it. And that's how, on the day my daughter locked me out, I opened my own door and never looked back. If this story resonated with you, even just a little, tell me. Sometimes voicing what hurt is how we begin to heal. If you know someone who needs to hear this, someone silenced for far too long, share it. Some wounds only heal when we realize we're not alone. And sometimes hearing another's story gives us courage to tell our own. If you want more stories like this, real people living unseen pains and turning points, stay here. There's much more life to be told. And maybe in one of those stories, you'll recognize yourself too. After all, each of us carries a piece of silence. But when we choose to listen with open hearts, even silence finds a voice.